In 1980, Lamberto Bava made his directorial debut with Macabre. Constantly shifting between tone and feel, the film is something of a roller coaster, and an unforgettable one at that. I am the Italian Horror Guy, and this is the Italian Horror Guy podcast. So I think what a great way to kick into his directorial career this was for Lamberto Bava, obviously the son of the much more well-known Mario Bava. He was something of a, what would you say, something of a film veteran by this point. He'd worked on a lot of different films at this point. I was just having a look at his filmography before this, and he'd worked on a number of films as assistant director, including actually just before it, Cannibal Holocaust. Also, Shock by his dad, Last Cannibal World, so Cannibal Holocaust. So a number, quite a number, which I just think is really, really cool that he eventually broke through and got to be a director because, as we'll be discussing in future weeks, he was also the director of both Demons films, which are absolutely fantastic. And you can see his voice and style beginning to come through here. This is honestly, the whole tone of this film is honestly so bizarre, right? Because, it has this early 80s, almost soap operatic feel to it at times. I don't know if anyone's ever seen the movie Patrick as well, which I think came out not long before this. To me, there's some real Patrick vibes in this film. I think the Italians did a lot of that, just sort of borrowing what was happening right at the time. And I sort of love the way that this film, it never feels to me like it's particularly hiding the ball or hiding the head, shall we say. I'm pretty sure the first time I watched it, it was quite obvious to me that it was the head that's in the fridge. But what is so fascinating about that is the film sort of relies, I guess, on it doesn't really matter if you know what the thing is because it's still going to be so shocking. So, if we just cast our minds forward to the sort of crescendo of the film where the main character, what's her name? We'll get her. Jane is making out with the very. I mean, it's just a disgusting scene as she's making out with the head, right? That we probably sense throughout the whole film that's what is in the fridge, right? Sorry, I'll just turn that down. That it's so you can't rely so much on the revelation of a twist. So instead, after it, you have to. You just have to really, really reward the audience with something so bizarre that they weren't expecting to look at, and. The whole crescendo with the killing of the daughter and the very last scene. That's some crazy stuff. But because it's not really hiding the ball so much on what's actually going on, it needs to reward us with some unbelievable imagery, and it really does, in my opinion. What a fun film. If I have one criticism of it right off the bat, it's that it's a little too ponderous, I think. I understand the tone that it was going for, but there are times when you're genuinely am I actually watching a horror film here? Because they spend so much time sort of, creating that just creating their little established things like the blind guy trying to romance Jane for some reason. Robert Duvall is his name, supposedly. So let's kick into some of the discussions about the actual film itself. It's one of these inspired by actual events things, and I haven't looked that up, or the actual events that it claims to be based on. And look, can I say, it's, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely hilarious in a sense, but the thing is, once you're saying inspired by true events and you're not saying based on a true story, like I'm suspicious. Because I mean, it just doesn't seem realistic to me that if you've got this amazing a story that you would try to link it to that, but to the extent that you just say inspired by true events. And the thing about that is you never really clarify exactly how linked the events are, right? So, look, I think, great, but I mean, what were the events? Was it a woman keeping a man's head in a fridge in New Orleans? I don't know. One thing I'll also make note of, again, just before I get into the specifics of the film, is how hilarious it is. Like, as we all know, there's a group, and a reasonably select group of voiceover actors that did these, like English-speaking actors that did these Italian horror films. It's so funny that they selected the same actors but just told them to do a New Orleans accent. Especially the voice of Jane, who, has voiced, she seems to be in a hell of a lot of Italian, as a voiceover in a hell of a lot of Italian horror films, which is good. But it's funny, rather than getting someone who is from the area, that I'll just do an accent. It reminds me of, Al Cleaver, who was the blonde dude in Zombie Flesh Eaters. He is also in a Fulci film called The Black Cat, I think from 1981 or 2. But it's based in England, so the same guy, he has the same voiceover for that film as he did in Zombie Flesh Eaters, but with a very ordinary British accent. So why not just get an actual British actor? But anyway, obviously, I assume they had some kind of, some kind of industry standard or whatever. So I just mentioned that. But the accents are sort of funny as the film goes on. And like the little girl, Jane's daughter, we'll just get her name as well. Her name is Lucy. Yeah. Oh, Lucy. Come on, Lucy. Lucy is dubbed just terribly, right? Like, it doesn't just not go with it, but just the way, just the whole thing, to be fair, is just absolutely ridiculous. But she's a great character. Sorry guys, I'm just woken up. Can I actually point out as well, there's quite similar vibes with this to, bloody hell, what's in it? The Bad Seed, 1956 film that I actually talked about last week or a couple of weeks ago on the Horror Film Science podcast. So get around that, guys. I don't know if it was really inspired by that, but there's something, there's something quite similar about her, about the way she sort of acts, sort of psychotic, I suppose, to Rhoda Penmark in that film. So that's really cool. I think other than the dubbing, I'm really happy with the way Lucy is in this film. I think, I think she really works. So it is a little bit of a pity about the dubbing, but that's the thing. Like, I think for the most part, we do just sort of embrace the absurdity of the dubbing sometimes, right? Like, obviously, I've talked about it a little bit on this podcast, but I think for the most part, you do sort of accept it. And so, we get a feel early in the film for the kind of tone that it's going for. And it has all these shots of New Orleans, and not everyone, there's this jazz music playing, and, it's sort of has this mixed tone between like romantic romance and like romance drama and like soap opera. And see, this is the thing, just again to reference Patrick. There's an interesting thing that happened in... I mean, I don't think you would really get this in horror films these days. But like where we have this mix between... mix of feeling between like the macabre and the horrific. And then the tone outside of it is very mundane. So like that's absolutely the case with Patrick, where when there's not horrific stuff happening, it's very like, it's just sort of, it honestly feels like a soap opera sometimes. Just very, very, very light, sort of not heavy, shall we say, tone. And you know, as I say, I don't think you'd see that in horror films too much now. I don't mind it, by the way. I think it's sort of cool because what it does do is give that impression of... It shows... I guess it's a good contrast, right? It shows just if the horror is so horrific, I think the contrast that it has to the rest of the film can feel very... well, it can make an even greater impact, and I think that's why, as I was saying, like the tone that shifts. The tone of the film makes it so at the end, with its unbelievable crescendo that this film has, that like it feels. I think the film is aiming for that ending to feel almost out of place, like that we haven't seen Jane be this psychotic. I think it's good. You know, I think it works. So so we established that the daughter. Look, I'm just thinking again about the bad seed thing, right? I don't think much is made in this film of like the very fact that both the mother and the daughter are absolutely crazy, but the idea of the bad seed is that like you sort of inherit your psychopathy or whatever, and like they are both sort of. Well, I guess Jane isn't a murderer, but Lucy becomes a murderer. But like, I don't know. It's probably not explained in the most effective way, right? That, like, it's not necessarily the absolutely most sensical thing that Lucy would be a murderer. And it's like just because of her sort of basic absence, I think seems to be the explanation, right? Like, oh, you don't pay enough attention to me type of thing. So it sort of establishes her, she's like being a little bit bossy to the... Is he the little brother? I don't know. Or is he just some kid that's there? Anyway, we'll just call him the little boy. Jeez, again, no, I think it is... Yeah, I'm not sure it is her brother. I'm just thinking again, like with the bad seed, because Rhoda kills that little boy. Yeah, they might have really, really borrowed some stuff here. But that's cool. That's how art works. That's how horror should work, I think. So, you know, Lucy sort of lights up a cigarette and, you know, she's, what would she be, 14? Maybe something like that. You know, it's definitely establishing her as like a little deviant, which is funny. And there's this weird... Yeah, okay, so Jane goes over to the blind guy's house, and then we get... He's sort of presented as very Patrick-like at first, because we don't know exactly... As in, like, I think the first time we see him is in the bath, and he's sort of sitting there, and he looks very absent. I don't think we know he's blind yet, so he just looks like he's very absent. It reminds me a lot of Patrick, the way he's always sitting there with his eyes open, and like, I don't know. It's sort of off-putting because it I think as it goes on, obviously it's revealed he's not, he's just blind, right? And that's interesting. The mother is sort of, sorry, not the mother. Jane at one point is sort of changing in front of him, and like she doesn't really care. It's an interesting thing, right? The way they do that. I don't know exactly what to make of it. Like there's something in it that there's just. I guess it's just a subtle way that the film, like I know he's blind so it doesn't matter, but I don't know if he's 100% completely blind, but this sort of subtle way that the film is telling us, I guess, that Jane is just a little bit abnormal. To be honest, I think that's one of the more... I think it's what makes the conclusion so rewarding. I think it's one of the more effective aspects of the film. The way, like, it just gives us enough information, right? That she's a little bit off as the film goes on, and as it turns out, she's, extraordinarily off. So the daughter, while she's there, the daughter tries to call her, but she ignores. But she ignores her, and as in Lucy, and then it sort of contrasts. I think can't quite remember. I think it's cutting between shots of, her, of Jane, having sex with, I don't know, is it the father or the lover? Whatever. I don't know. So that's happening. Cutting between that and them and Lucy murdering the little boy. And again, like it's very disconcerting because, as I think I've mentioned a few times on this podcast, it is one of those things that happens in horror movies that even for fairly seasoned veterans of watching horror films, as I'm sure we all are, like killing children is off still, and children killing children, I don't know, that feels even more so. There's something about the way this scene's shot that always makes me feel like he's not going to die, and then he just does. I don't know. It's probably hard to explain exactly why that is. Maybe it's just because it's a child, and it's like, no, they're not going to kill a child in such a subtle way. But also because, like, they establish, I guess, a little bit, right? Like a little bit what's that Lucy's a bit off, but the way they jump from Lucy's slightly neglected and Lucy's slightly off to Lucy's murdering this child, it is a bit like, oh, okay, but sort of that's the tone of the film, right? Like most of the time things are a little bit off, and then suddenly they're unbelievably off, right? So yeah, it's interesting. And I think this is, it's almost got soft porn sort of vibes at times, this movie. And I think it's because of that jazzy theme that happens quite often, and because Jane always seems to be having sex with people or masturbating, and I think it's the way it happens quite often while it's contrasting or it's cutting back and forth between the two things, or as in that and whatever happens to be happening. And it's odd, right? Because the film, in some strange way, almost presents sexuality as deviant, I think. And it's not the sexuality itself, it's the timing of it. And that's just sort of a fascinating thought, I reckon, because, you know, there's a lot of deviance that happens around sexuality in horror films, and that was certainly an aspect of the era. But it's not usually like the sexuality itself is like, you know, I guess they can show this if they want. But it's like all the bad that happens, right? Like, and the thing is, so, you know, sometimes she's having sex at a time she shouldn't be because she should be focusing on her daughter, or sometimes it's happening while, you know, while Robert is listening, and it's very, like, the film goes to such lengths to make Robert likable. I think that's probably the key, right? That we're like, can you just, I don't know, can you just pay a bit of attention to him? Like, obviously she doesn't have to, but it's a bit, I don't know, it's a bit upsetting because Robert is like, he's presented very, very nicely, right? And he seems like a very, very kind man in every way. So, you know, in hindsight, it's probably not the best judgment that he makes by being interested in Jane. But I'll probably just make a little note of something about Robert in a more subtextual sort of way that I actually do really, really like, right? There's this, you know, and it's probably a real academic thing in regard to horror films, but, you know, we talk about what you can, like the idea of voyeurism and what you can see, right? Having a blind guy in a horror film, I think, is a really, really interesting device, because you, quite simply, Robert has such a different perception of things because he can't see. Like, there's a point where he actually finds the head, and you can tell he seems slightly disgusted by it because it doesn't feel right, but he can't see it. Right? He can't see what's going on. And I don't know. It just works very well in my head, I suppose. I don't necessarily know exactly what I'm trying to say, but it works really well in my head, so there you go. Just consulting my notes here, guys. We'll obviously have to make note of the death of the lover. We'll just call him the lover. The really good thing about the way this scene happens, and, you know, there's got to be some extent of violence and stuff because it's a horror film. I think the thing that's most important about this is it's shot in such a way that, like, to maximize the extent of what she has seen. And that's really important because I think we need to understand that it would be, what she's seen is horrific enough to make her actually lose her mind, you know. I'm not going to go into, like, the psychological realism of that, but as a horror movie, I think that's really important. And we don't see the decapitated head at first, and actually just thinking about it now, the sort of way it happens, it sort of feels as though it might have mangled his head a little bit. Anyway, when it shows the crash, and then we see it from Jane's perspective, and there's blood on her and she's screaming, and then it sort of pans across to whatever it is that's gone through the lover's head, and I think it sort of shows the body under it. And to me, the way the scene unfolds makes you go, she saw exactly what happened. And as I say, that's very important, because what has happened is fairly horrific, and if seeing something bad is enough to make one lose their mind, then, you know, they've probably done enough justice to that with this particular scene. So, you know, she ends up in a psychiatric ward briefly, blah, 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 I think. So, we see Robert, he cooks some dinner for Jane, and, you know, he gets all dressed up, and he looks really nice. And we're like, oh, that's really nice. Do we like Robert maybe even in a slightly patronising way? I don't know, probably. But, you know, it is what it is. That's okay. But she rejects him, right? And he takes it on the chin pretty well. But again, whilst I think as the film goes on, we probably know what is happening with... Well, we probably appreciate exactly what's happening. I don't think it... In this moment, we necessarily... Like, it sort of necessarily goes directly into our head. So, like, the absurdity of what's happening. Robert has just cooked Jane a nice dinner, and Jane seems to like Robert enough. I don't know, like, probably not romantically, but to be honest, I'm not totally convinced that it completely wouldn't happen. But she's rejected him not in like a this is awkward kind of way, but because she's planning on a romantic night with a severed head. Because, you know, she's all dressed up in a sort of nightie, and, you know, she's quite, in a nightie. Because I don't know if it's meant to immediately occur to us, but that is so unbelievably funny and psychotic, the idea of that, right? That I would have, like, again, it's not explained directly, but she would have gone and, you know, talked to him. Oh, sorry, she would have gone and had dinner with him, but, you know, she's got to have sex with her head. Oh, what is this? What is this podcast? What are these movies we're talking about? Unbelievable. So there's a little shrine and candles, and she masturbates, and so again, this is where it comes becomes sort of deviant, the idea of sexuality, just more in a symbolic sense, because we like Robert, but he's forced to listen to this, right? He looks very upset, and we feel like, you know, she could have at least gone down for dinner with him, you know. So I don't know. I think Jane's quite likeable. I don't know if the film's trying to make us dislike her at this point, but, like, I guess if it was directly sort of telling us right now that the exact reason, you know, the head thing, we're like, yeah, maybe you should move on there, Robert. It's probably not going to work. So, Yeah. Next day, that guy comes over and, like, you know, it's interesting because, like, I think the film is doing its best to sort of present, like, I guess non-deviant behavior as, or non-deviance in relation to sexuality or certain sexuality as deviant in a really interesting way, right? because I don't think horror movies do that very often, where that guy, he's not an absolute jerk, he's an older guy, he comes over, but he's there picking up a trumpet or something. Does Robert fix trumpets? I can't remember. And he asks Robert if he sleeps with it, and see, there's this sort of male thing that, enough of us do, so we're all sort of forced to do it amongst ourselves, the way we talk about women and, all of that crap. And he doesn't want any part of it, right, because he's too nice. And we like him, we're like, the film's sort of feeding us, I suppose, some degree of morality before it feeds something else later. So... Okay, yeah. So, I think as it goes on, obviously, we're sort of, I would say, presented, or the film presents Jane sympathetically, right? But I think it works slowly to undermine that. Like, we can tell that she's getting weirder and weirder as the thing moves along. Sorry. But how would you put it? As that sort of falling apart, I think or the perception of her, I think we're more and more accepting of that there's something off about her. I can't remember exactly how early it is that they reveal the fridge as a concept, but as it goes on, I think we're because she's not giving anything to Robert, or and she's ignoring her daughter. I think more and more we're not interested. I think we get sick of her. I know I do anyway. So, there's that scene. I think it's a dinner table where she's doing her best. Is Lucy to sort of show some love and attention to her mum, and her mum just, as in Jane, just doesn't really give her anything in return. So I think the film in some way is sort of saying that part of the issue with this person is that she's not paying any attention, that she doesn't get any attention paid to her. But then at the same time, the film probably doesn't earn the right quite to turn that and use it as she murders a little boy, right? But I guess by the end we're like, okay, maybe the other stuff that we find out about the girl sort of does justify that. I don't know. We'll explore that, I guess. Just consulting some notes again. Yeah, okay. So, if we'll remember, there's that scene. I think the film, it slowly begins to present her just losing sanity, right? Losing likableness, but also losing sanity. She wanders the streets at night, and she does seem a little bit lost at one point. She finds some lingerie, and along with that sort of dropping of insanity, we also get, or dropping of sanity, we also get, I think, increasingly sexual behaviour, which is interesting, because as I keep saying, it's not usually presented to this extent, right, in horror movies, that sexuality is bad. But by that, I guess this is probably the most effective way to say it. Plenty of people get, so shall we say, punished symbolically, or literally, in horror films from as a result of their sexual behaviour. But, you know, the untrained and judgmental eye would say, well, this is disgraceful. What the hell are these films saying? But then if you sort of dig just slightly deeper into it, it's like, well, it's the psychopath that we all hate that is punishing them. So sort of basically the morality of the film is whatever the opposite of the murderer is thinking, or something along those lines. So they're not actually immoral in that sense. They're probably more moral in a sense, showing immoral actions of an immoral person or people. Whereas in this film, sometimes that sexuality is sort of used to show her loss of sanity. So, as in Jane's loss of sanity. And it's just, you know, so Robert tries to have dinner with her again. She fobs that off, but she agrees to a drink. And again, with this bathing thing, there's a scene she's sitting in the bath and Robert's in there. And obviously, yes, he's blind and stuff, but she's even more casual about being nude in this situation than, I don't know if you'd say she should be, but yeah, there's just something a little bit... Is it disrespectful to Robert? Is that what I'm struggling with here? That might be it. Because he seems very aware, like he would be very aware she's naked, and I don't, you know, he's interested in her, so obviously it's uncomfortable or arousing or whatever, but, you know, I just feel that the depiction there is like, if she was more together, she would have a bit more respect or a bit more wherewithal to be like, to still like wait for him to get out before she gets out of the bath type of thing. Especially given she doesn't even seem interested, like she's not doing it as a method of trying to turn him on or seduce him or anything, because that never happens. In my notes here, it says she masturbates again. This time she gets the head from the freezer. I'm not sure if it actually shows the head at this point, or I was just... Because these notes are from a few years ago, actually. Anyway. We'll say that she does. And obviously the sanity is now completely... The mask of sanity has completely slipped. And again, Robert has to listen. And this is a very pornographic type of scene. A very soft pornographic type of scene, I suppose you'd say. And then, so, you know, she's masturbating with her head, or to her head. Robert's listening, and then it just sort of cuts to a nice mundane day in the park. And, like the next day. And that's, you know, it emphasises the extent to which the film is determined to, I don't know, to ensure that to emphasise the insanity of what's going on. The film goes to great lengths to make the aspects of the film that aren't insane completely like mundane. And I'm all for that. You know, as mundane as they possibly can. I think it's a really good technique, actually, right? That contrasting of things. So, I don't think I made it clear, but it seems that Jane is sort of staying with Robert. I don't know exactly why or how that works, but anyway, that's the thing. Lucy comes to the house and starts snooping around a little bit, and I guess you'd almost call this the final act, or the beginning, or the precursor to the final act. I think there's still a little bit, or quite a bit to go at this point, but it's like you know, you sort of sense once Lucy gets involved that things aren't going to go well here. As it turns out, they don't go very well for Lucy. But, you know. So, yeah, I'd forgotten about that. That Robert, that she actually does sort of I don't know, approach Robert at one point, and she helps him undress, and they you know, touch each other a little bit. I forgot about that. So yeah, that's interesting. I don't know what to make of that. I feel sorry for Robert a little bit, right? So anyway, Robert eventually goes up to Jane's room, and you know, there seems to be like the shape of a man on the bed, but you know, it's just sort of pillows that have been arranged in that way, which is, well, psychotic, I suppose. I don't know. Is it like a thing where she puts it there so she can come into the room, like, oh, there he is. There's my lover. Okay. So Robert talks to the father of, I think the father or maybe the grandfather or some guy in relation to the little boy that is killed by Lucy early in the film, right? And like, I guess Robert, as the film's gone on, has sort of sensed that he's, you know, there's something not necessarily right about Jane, but he doesn't seem to, well, he definitely doesn't realise the extent. There's just this great line, you know, and this guy on the phone doesn't want to talk about her, right? He doesn't want to think about it. I think he says to me, she doesn't exist, and blames her for their son's death. It says, I've got their son's death. Maybe they were something. I don't know. Maybe they were together. Anyway, he comes up with the great line. In relation to Robert being interested in Jane, I assume, if I was you, young man, I'd have my head examined. Which is obviously just a brilliant self-referential concept, and I am absolutely all for it. Right. Really, really cool. In fact, I think I'll include something like that in the title, to be perfectly honest. How could I not? Right. Absolutely great line. So, Robert and Lucy have some kind of fight. She says that Robert's jealous or whatever. Honestly, I think the film does such a great job, you know, being, or of making us like Robert, but also making us feel sorry for Robert. Because, like, he's blind, for a start, so he's literally blind to the stuff that's going on, and the stuff that's going on is obviously absolutely horrific, and he doesn't realise the extent of that. But on top of that, he's never really treated well by anyone except for Jane, and Jane is the absolute psychopath. But he's not treated that well by Jane, right? Like, again, like, obviously there's no obligation for Jane to romance him, right? If she's not interested, she's not interested. But I think the frustrating thing is there's nothing completely that suggests that she wouldn't be interested, you know, because they do have quite a bit of rapport, and at times it almost feels patronising, but I don't think it is. I think it's just that she doesn't have the time. I would love to have dinner with you, Robert, but I have to, simulate sexual relations with the head of my deceased former lover. So he's sort of drawn the short end of the stick there, has Robert. But also, the father of or the grandfather of the little boy is a jerk to him. And then Lucy's a jerk to him as well. And it's like, all these people have reasons to be upset and whatever. Jane included, obviously. But, like, Robert never does anything wrong. Like, he never. But life's just so difficult for him. In some ways, it's made easier by his blindness, being blind to the stuff. But of course, he could protect himself a bit better if he was, if he could see, So Lucy mocks him and says that she knows he loves her mum, and it's just so unfair on him, I reckon. So the dad drops Lucy off for the weekend. And I guess this is the final act, right? And what a great final act it is. I'm just going to quickly go through my notes here just to okay. Yeah. Just consulting to just see what I have to talk about over the next 15 minutes or so. The mundanity, again, of all of it is brilliant. So I think by this point, us viewers are very, very well aware of what's going on with the head and Jane generally, and that's fine. What we're not aware of, I think, is just how sick the film is. And it's cool. Okay, so let me explain. We know there's a head in the fridge and all of that. It's sort of insane, I think, the way... How should I put this? The way the film is presenting Jane for most of it and getting us closer and closer to the truth about what she's sort of doing. It's not that she's evil, or we think it's not that she's evil, and I think this is part of what's disconcerting about the way the film ends. I think that's what I'm trying to say. She starts off, obviously, she seems quite nice, to be honest, right at the start. She's fine. I think the insinuation of the film is that she is okay, and then she sees this crazy, awful thing, and it makes her insane, right? So, fair enough. And then that, I guess that's where it sort of diverts from the mad seed thing of, because her daughter was already crazy, right? Sorry. We don't, again, and I think this is largely because of the way the rest of or many other aspects of the film are presented as like, what would you say? Mundane and sort of family-like. Part of the horror of this film is obviously just the blatant horror of it, but also often the way it is in relation to normal everyday human interactions. So we have the dinner, right? And, I think anyone who's seen this
movie and has seen South Park must have made the connection. So she feeds part of the head to her own mother. Now this has Cartman and Scott Tenorman vibes. So I'll just park that. I'll just leave that. But it's hilarious to think about. What's so great about this is the way it's done in such a subtle way, right? The daughter's, she's going to cook dinner for them. And, Jane picks up a spoon with maggots on it. We can see the maggots and she puts it in her mouth. I almost feel sick thinking about it, right? Genuinely, the thought of it. It's so disgusting. But, I'm just thinking of the reaction from Jane. Now, obviously, she's disgusted. But in some ways, she's less disgusted by the maggots that she's just eaten. Or chewed on. Than she is about the fact that her daughter has done it. Right? That Lucy's done this. And, there's that understanding. She looks at Lucy... And she knows, right? She doesn't say it, but we know that she knows. Lucy, you've found the head that I have in a fridge and you've... Well, I was going to say cut it up. That's probably the one disappointing thing. The head is still in the fridge. So what's she done? Taken some maggots out of it? I guess Jane's sort of getting what she deserves here, right? I suppose. I don't know. But that knowing look that she gives, that smile, right? And this is where Lucy really, well, I wouldn't say comes into her own. I think she's a good character, but we see here you are genuinely psychotic. I guess what I'd say is up to this point, the film didn't feel like it had quite earned the right to present her as this, the extent of the deviant that she is. It doesn't quite feel completely correct or natural or something. But, here, it actually does feel quite natural. She is crazy and she's mean-spirited and all of that. Lucy says, everyone loves you because you're so pretty. And says that she's the crazy one. They're going to put you away forever. And she says that she killed her brother for her parents. So it was a brother. Sorry about that, guy. And I love this because it actually makes us ponder, is it all Jane's fault? I don't know. Is the film taking a stance here? Because, to be fair, I don't think... obviously, there's no excuse to be murdering a little brother. But, even within that, I don't think this rant from Lucy is the film necessarily trying to justify her actions. But because of how bad and I suppose evil Jane is, this scene's difficult to sort of assess, right? Because it's okay, yeah, Lucy, you're sort of full of shit, but so is Jane. And then Jane kills her. So I think I don't think we know how to feel, right? And this is an absolutely great scene, right? She drowns her daughter, and it's poetic, right? Because the daughter's drowned her brother earlier in the movie. But it's also funny because this has just come as a result of this nice little mundane family dinner type thing. It's the ultimate the ultimate destroyed dinner, right, with the maggots and the murder of the child. But all of this... Oh, look. Do we even care that Lucy dies? Right? I don't know. Is Jane... Here's another way of thinking. Is Jane up until the moment she murders Lucy? Or maybe even after that? Is she still sympathetic? Now, it's obviously very not right or good to be having that head in the fridge. But is she hurting anyone? Right? Is she just completely insane? Now, she's not the best to Robert, but she's not terrible to him. And she's not the best to her daughter by ignoring her daughter. But it's like, well, her daughter's a murderer. How much attention does she deserve? And I don't think the film goes to the lengths to say, oh, well, she definitely became a murderer because her mother doesn't pay attention. Like, I don't think it quite tries to tell us that, right? So, up until she starts attacking Robert, is she still borderline sympathetic? I was going to say sane, but she's not borderline sane. Borderline sympathetic. And then she, and you know, so we're right into the last moments now. She's eaten some maggots from the head of her decapitated lover, who she's murdered her own daughter by drowning her. And then it's like she just loses her mind, right? It's like this is like classic end of horror film stuff. And she attacks Robert. She pushes him down the stairs, and I love the way she runs off. I love, you know, she's got that arms are all out. She's got that weird I'm insane sort of. It's just great. I just think the way the actress plays this is really, 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 really cool, and funny. Like it's genuinely funny. And then, like, this whole scene builds, right? We get the maggots. We get the murder of the daughter. We get the pushing down the stairs of Robert. We get the insane running. And then we get this scene where she's making out with the head. And see, here's the thing, right? And this is what's so it's like exceptional, the way they build it to this crescendo. Because, so we get all that stuff, and then we know she's off throughout the film. We know she's not completely right. But, as I say, we don't know the extent, but eventually we get it. But we've seen the head, then we've seen... But it hasn't looked discoloured, like, you know, in the way it is at the moment. And it's disgusting. But she's making out with the head, and she's not holding back. And it's like, we've just seen all this. It's sort of like... just like a sensory overload almost that the film's going for here. It's putting all of its bad nature to excess and extreme in this moment, and it's great. It's really, really effective, right? And we're going, oh wow, okay, this is unbelievable. And I guess so. Eventually, well, I'll just say the way it's cutting between her making out with the head and shots of the dead daughter, it's like this is yeah, this is insane, and it's payoff, right? It's everything we want in the conclusion of a horror film. Sorry. Robert can't get out. I think the door's locked. And he stumbles upstairs and pushes Jane onto this furnace, and it burns her face, and she dies. Now, I'll probably say it seems a bit weird that she dies of that. Like, she would be severely burned. But anyway, so she dies, and maybe we could talk, like, symbolically, you know, she's not the prettiest anymore. Now, can I just say, up until this point in the movie, and okay, Robert goes, I think, to the bed. Yeah, he does. Now, it is conceivable. Everything that's happened in the film so far is possible. It's not a supernatural film. Here's why the very, very ending is... So, the head leaps up from the bed and bites Robert. And then there's a quote or some writing over the screen that says, I guess, the coroners or something. Coroners could not confirm why Robert Duvall died. Now, and then the film ends. Now, I have to talk very briefly about this. This is when we get to inspired by true events. I think the film wants us to go home in 1980, having watched it, thinking, did a person in real life die because a severed head leapt off a bed and bit him to death? Now, my guess... Well, the thing is, the film doesn't even make clear if these names are real, right? So, you know, the thing is, it's inspired by true... It's so dodgy, right? It's inspired by true events, which means basically nothing. But anyway, it's inspired by true events. And but presumably the characters in this film, like that in this film, they don't have the actual names. I'm going to, I think, safely assume. So when at the end it says, "Oh, Robert Duvall was blah blah blah," it's like, okay, but Robert Duvall's not even real. So it's relying on us remembering that this is supposedly based on true events. Anyway, I find there's one reason and one reason alone that this ending, well, is maybe justifiable. And that is, as insane as everything is just as a factual measure or level throughout this film, it's quite mundane and family oriented and like soap operatic, all that. What it isn't is insane and utterly ridiculous, at least in the things that it's showing us, until this final scene. And I think there's an aspect where the film wants you to go home or go away from it thinking, wow, that was ridiculous. Like it's not trying to have credibility on a realism level, I don't think. So after we've seen the maggots, the murder of the daughter, the pushing down the stairs of Robert, the insanity of Jane, the making out with the head, it's like we need more. Now the head has to bite Robert and whatever. So it's sort of sad, right? Because I think once Jane's dead, we instinctively think Robert's not going to die, but apparently he does. So that's the end of my discussion of Macabre by Lamberto Bava. That was very fun. It's just a very fun movie. So next couple of weeks, I've got 2 more Lamberto Bava films coming up, and you know, where else would I start but Demons, 1985, and then the week after it's going to be Demons 2. You know, I think Demons is an absolute favourite of the Italian horror film fan, and I can understand why it's one of my favourites too. So hope you enjoyed this discussion, and do join me next week for the Demons discussion, because that's going to be really, really fun. So thanks very much, guys, and I look forward to that one.